la Iglesia está observando con mucho cuidado las implicaciones éticas de esta vacuna y quiere asegurarnos a todos que la decisión de vacunarse es una decisión ética.
안녕하세요. 잘 지냈어요? Soy Esther desde Corea y en este vídeo voy a exponer cuál es la postura de la Iglesia respecto de las vacunas anti-COVID-19. En este vídeo vamos a responder preguntas como ¿qué relación tienen las vacunas con los fetos abortados? Vamos a mostrar cómo funcionan las vacunas respecto del virus y comprenderéis cuál y por qué es la postura de la Iglesia respecto de las vacunas COVID. He elaborado este vídeo a partir de un fragmento de una charla de una inmunóloga sueca, la doctora Katarina Leblanc. Es inmunóloga clínica y doctora en Medicina por el Instituto Karolinska de Estocolmo. Ella es miembro ordinario de la Academia para la Vida Pontificia, nombrada por el Santo Padre. Ella es experta en investigación clínica con células madre. Es doctora en Medicina, especialista en hematología. Ha realizado más de 100 publicaciones revisadas por pares y en conferencias internacionales ha participado más de 140 veces. Cuenta con gran experiencia clínica con pacientes de leucemia, especialmente en trasplantes de células madre. Es decir, es una especialista en todo este tema de las células madre. El vídeo original del que he extraído este fragmento es una conferencia muy larga de 2 horas en las que participan otros ponentes, pertenece al canal de YouTube Líderes Católicos. He extraído este trozo porque me parecía que era el más interesante, el que va al meollo de la cuestión de las vacunas y su relación con los fetos abortados. Los que tengáis ganas de ver toda la conferencia, os voy a dejar el link aquí debajo en la descripción del vídeo. También participan otros cardenales de México. Yo solo he extraído la conferencia de la doctora Katarina Leblanc, un trozo de esta conferencia y 2 fragmentos, uno del cardenal Carlos Aguiar Retes, arzobispo primado de México, y otro del arzobispo de Boston, cardenal Sean O'Malley, que resumen muy bien la postura de la Iglesia. También os dejo aquí abajo el link de la nota que la Congregación para la Doctrina de la Fe publicó el día 21 de diciembre del 2020 en relación a la moralidad del uso de algunas vacunas del COVID. Pues espero que este vídeo os guste mucho, que os sea muy clarificadora la charla de la doctora Katarina, como para mí lo ha sido, y compartirle este vídeo a quien penséis que le puede ser muy útil. Bueno, pues nos vemos. ¡Chao, chao!
A vaccine serves 2 purposes. It protects us from getting sick, or at least protects us from very severe disease, and it limits spreading between people. The way the vaccine does this is by teaching the human body to recognize the virus or bacteria and learn to destroy them. The vaccine needs to mimic the virus or bacteria and is often made up of weakened or killed forms of the microbe or parts of the surface proteins. A characteristic and important part of the coronavirus is the spike protein on the surface. It looks like little red mushrooms. The virus uses the spike protein to attach to our cells and to enter into our cells. If the body forms antibodies directed towards the spike protein, the antibodies can block uptake of the virus into our tissues and protect us from getting sick. Again, the reason for taking the vaccine are both to protect from getting sick and develop severe corona disease, but very importantly, also to protect others, the old, the frail, people with risk factors, pregnant women. The only other way to protect people at risk is continued social distancing. And we know this is not enough. We know that the virus is very contagious and that social distancing is not sufficient because the virus has spread all over the planet in just 1 year, in spite of lockdowns and restrictions. We know from history that vaccines can save lives. When the polio vaccine was introduced in the United States in 1955, the number of polio cases in that year decreased from 60,000 the year before to 13,000, and polio is now eradicated. Another dramatic example of how vaccines can save us is the introduction of a vaccine against rubella. It was a common childhood disease with fever and a rash. However, in pregnant women, the virus can spread to the unborn child, causing very severe damage. And in just one outbreak in the United States in 1964, congenital rubella affected 20,000 unborn babies, leading to over 2,000 neonatal deaths, more than 11,000 cases of deafness, over 3,500 cases of blindness, and 1,800 children born with mental disability. It was this outbreak that pushed for the development and introduction of a rubella vaccine. And with the help of the vaccine, rubella was eliminated in the United States in 2004. Normally, vaccines are thoroughly tested before given to people large scale. Testing must show that the vaccine is safe and that it effectively prevents disease. This is done by testing the vaccine in the laboratory, in experimental animal models, and last in clinical trials. Usually, a small phase 1 trial shows that the vaccine appears safe and is not associated with severe side effects. The phase 1 trial is followed by a larger phase 2 trial that should indicate that the vaccine is effective and protects from developing the disease. Last, a phase 3 trial should confirm that the vaccine prevents disease. Phase 3 trials are normally very large and compares outcome of vaccinated subjects to control subjects treated with placebo. You can see the very large number of participants included in some of the phase 3 trials performed with the new vaccines against corona. There are several other companies that have large phase 3 trials ongoing that are not yet published. We are very lucky to live in a time when modern science and modern technology allows the development of a vaccine in such a short time. 1 year ago, I think nobody expected that it would be possible. Developing an effective vaccine typically takes years and sometimes decades. And in 1 year, just 1 year after COVID-19 occurred, a pathogen was determined, the coronavirus. We know what it looks like. Vaccine targets were identified. Vaccine constructs were created. Manufacturing to scale was developed. Phase 1 through phase 3 trials conducted, and the data have been reported in peer-reviewed scientific publications. The Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna phase 3 trials were published just before New Year's. Also, AstraZeneca has published a pooled interim analysis of its different trials that are ongoing in the UK, Brazil, and South Africa. The results of other trials have been reported in preliminary form, but the results have not yet been published, and the data are not publicly accessible. The figure shows the results from the Pfizer trial. The results are very similar in the Moderna study and show a very effective protection of disease in the first 3 to 4 months after vaccination. Knowing how long the protection lasts will require longer follow-up and take more time. For more than 40 years, cell lines have been used in the laboratories to study vaccines and sometimes to produce them. The cell lines are engineered to grow indefinitely. These cell lines have been used for the development of many common and important vaccines, including the vaccines against hepatitis, rubella, chickenpox, shingles, and rabies. The reason that these cell lines have been used so extensively is that they are robust and they're well characterized. Virus grows well in them, and they're validated for safety by regulatory agencies. The origin of these cell lines is fetal tissue from specific abortions. The fetal cells have been molecularly engineered into cell lines that will grow forever. I want to stress that the abortions were not performed for the purpose of vaccine development. There are no body parts and no fetal tissue left, just the genetically modified cells. And very importantly, accepting these vaccines will not mean consenting to future abortions, nor will it lead to future abortions. The Vatican, as we just heard, has been clear that accepting the vaccines is very far from actively participating in abortion and therefore morally acceptable, given the large benefit vaccines have. Many vaccines are on the way, and this is just a few of them. The use of fetal cell lines differs between different vaccines. Pfizer and Moderna use HEC293 cells in tests on the efficacy of the vaccines, and whereas AstraZeneca and the Russian vaccine, for example, use them in the production of the vaccine. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are the only vaccines where the phase 3 data have been published and are available in the public domain. The follow-up is still short, and it will take time before we have long-term data, both regarding efficacy as well as safety. As I showed you before, the vaccines appear to offer very good protection. Side effects typically include pain at the injection site, but can also include mild symptoms of disease, such as muscle pain, headache, and fatigue, sometimes also fever during the first day or two. Side effects that are severe, such as anaphylactoid reactions, are rare. Of course, those who know that they have a severe allergy to any of the components in a particular vaccine should not be vaccinated with that particular vaccine. However, in general, the benefits of the vaccine far outweigh the rare risks. I would like to say a few words regarding COVID infection in pregnant women. It appears that women who are in the later stages of pregnancy have an increased risk of developing severe COVID disease. This is particularly true for pregnant women who are already have risk factors such as heart disease, lung disease, or diabetes. The baby does not seem to be at risk, but there is an increased risk of the baby being born early, before 37 weeks of gestation. The vaccines have not been studied in pregnant women, so data on their safety during pregnancy is limited. We know from the past that other non-live vaccines are safe to give to pregnant and breastfeeding women. There is also no known mechanism for how the vaccines could affect the fetus. In contrast, it could be theoretically possible that if the mother forms antibodies after vaccination, those antibodies could protect the baby after birth. As for now, it is important for pregnant women to be careful, stay away from getting sick, and followed WHO and national guidelines. So should we prefer one vaccine to another? Well, most likely, individuals may not have a choice. Governments will decide what vaccines will be available in different countries. The data on vaccines that I have shared with you here are the data made publicly available through publications. Governments will make their decisions and have access also to confidential data presented by the vaccine manufacturers. Even if the need for vaccines is urgent, since people are falling sick and dying, it is still important to follow established routes for vaccine development and avoid hasty decisions. To overcome the pandemic, global distribution of the vaccine is essential. This means that vaccines cannot be too expensive for poorer countries to afford. Some vaccines, such as Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, require freezing during distribution, and that makes distribution of those vaccines perhaps difficult in underdeveloped countries. We know now, 1 year into the pandemic, that social distancing is not enough to stop COVID-19. Vaccination is the only way to halt the pandemic. But since it will take some time before we know how effective the vaccines turn out to be, and since we still do not know if all people with different underlying disorders can be safely vaccinated, it is still important to continue to be careful and show consideration to others. This means protect yourself and you will protect others. Wear a mask, stay at least 1 meter away from others, avoid crowds, wash your hands with soap and water or a disinfectant. If you wash your hands, you need to wash your hands for a long time, and follow travel, quarantine, and workplace guidance, even after you receive a vaccine. Thank you. I would like to stress one more time that the fear that we should feel is fear of the virus and what it's doing to us. The dangers of the vaccine, they're being well controlled. They're going through rigorous testing. They're going through scrutiny with the regulatory authorities. The fear of the vaccines can only be lesser than the fear of the virus. And I think for our own sakes and for the sakes of those around us, I would strongly encourage people to be vaccinated so we can stop the pandemic and stop the suffering. Thank you.
He querido adjuntaros también en descripción aquí del vídeo 3 vídeos cortos. Uno que desmiente los mitos sobre que a través de la vacuna nos van a poner un chip que nos van a controlar. Otro que explica las diferencias entre las diferentes vacunas y otro que habla de los componentes exclusivamente de la vacuna Pfizer. Todos estos 3 vídeos son muy breves y creo que son muy informativos. Bueno, ya me comentáis en comentarios qué os ha parecido este vídeo y si aún os quedan dudas, hacedmelo saber abajo en los comentarios. ¡Nos vemos!
Y que debemos alentar a la gente a hacer uso de esta arma tan importante en la lucha contra la pandemia.
Es evidente para la razón práctica que la vacunación no es, por regla general, una obligación moral y que, por lo tanto, la vacunación debe ser voluntaria. En cualquier caso, desde un punto de vista ético, la moralidad de la vacunación depende no solo del deber de proteger la propia salud, sino también del deber de perseguir el bien común.